Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Q&A webinar to discuss the upcoming Space Technology Payload Challenge that NASA expects to open in December. To be clear, the challenge is not open yet, but we wanted to take this opportunity to give you some information about the TechLeap Prize, under which this new challenge is being issued. The session is being recorded and it will be posted online. I'm putting the link in the chat for where you'll be able to find the recording when it becomes available. We do ask that you keep your mics muted and your cameras off to ensure that we get a nice clean recording. And so we ask that you also put your questions in the chat as we go along. There are some questions that we've anticipated that you have, and so we will have sort of a frequently asked questions part of the presentation where we will be answering some of those questions, but do feel free to put your questions in the chat as they occur to you and we will answer them. And again, if I could ask you to please turn off your cameras, that would be great. There will be some future webinars related to this challenge. In particular, you want to mark your calendars for January 8th. That's when we will have a community of practice webinar. And there's a link that you can go to see more about that. But really the best way to know about that, as well as the February and March Q&As, is to sign up for alerts. And I'm putting those notes in the chat as well. Okay, so to be clear, we're answering questions today about understanding the mechanism of the TechLeap Prize, particularly as it compares to the Tech Flight Solicitation. So I'm going to hand it over to Danielle because the TechLeap Prize is managed by the Flight Opportunities Program at NASA. And so I'm going to have our program manager, Danielle McCulloch, give you an introduction very quickly to the Flight Opportunities Program. Danielle?
Thanks so much, Nancy. So first of all, thanks to everybody for joining us today. As Nancy mentioned, I am the program manager for Flight Opportunities. I am very lucky to get to manage this really fun program. We love getting people to flight test with our commercial partners. And so we are excited to share TechLeap with you today. This is something that we started to try to really focus on our ability to quickly get technologies to flight test. And that is a core part of the mission of the program. We rapidly demonstrate technologies for space exploration, discovery, and the expansion of space commerce using suborbital and hosted orbital testing with our industry flight providers. We really do want to foster commercial industry while simultaneously advancing the missions of NASA. And it is really fun to get to do that. We want to let you know about a couple of things about the program so that you understand the context of how we work. So I've said this a couple times already, but speed is really important to us. We want to start proving out technologies quickly. So rather than waiting on the ground until everything's perfect, we're okay with a little bit of risk tolerance for those payloads and getting to flight fast. We often talk about fly, fix, fly. Fly something once, figure out what works, figure out what doesn't, take another shot at it and try again. We really appreciate the wide array of commercial capabilities that are available to us. That is the wonderful thing about commercial industry is each of these companies has pursued something a little bit different in terms of the capabilities that they provide. And that offers our technical community this really rich environment of test opportunities. And so through that, we are really able to change that pace of space. And our goal is to, again, space exploration, everything we can do to help facilitate that. In terms of the commercial the ethos of the program, one of the things I will note is that Flight Opportunities is part of the Space Technology Mission Directorate at NASA. And so again, that whole piece of trying to advance technology, we do provide services across the agency as well. So we do see scientific experiments that make use of our commercial platforms as well. But our home and original kind of mission was to develop technologies. And so we are within the Space Technology Mission Directorate. Our program sits at NASA Armstrong Flight Research Center, which is at Edwards Air Force Base. And part of the philosophy behind that home is the rich history of flight test that is at Armstrong, and this risk-tolerant, flexible, rapid approach to advancing technologies and learning along the way. And so that is really a huge part of our ethos. We are very committed to using commercial capabilities and best practices. We do try to pair that up with NASA subject matter expertise. So there are things that NASA is really, really good at, and we do not want to lose that. But we want to leverage some of the things that commercial industry can do a little bit differently and some of their best practices. So we find that partnership to work really well. We do use risk-informed decision-making, and we embrace risk tolerance. That is a piece of when you can go quickly, have low-cost access to flight test. It facilitates the ability to be more risk tolerant. Clearly, things like safety are never negotiable, but we can take a little bit more risk in what we're doing here. We also are constraint driven. So cost and schedule are things that we keep an eye on. Once those start to mushroom, the complexity of a project changes. And so we really do want to focus on keeping things low cost, cost efficient, quick iterations of projects, and our commercial partners help us do that. We want to move very quickly from benchtop to flight test to de-risk technology. Although Flight Opportunities does invest in technologies and part of the technology development pathway, we are really focused on that flight test portion of things. So payload development, trying things out in flight. We have lots of other places at NASA that are supporting the technology development aspect of it, from concept to that benchtop prototype. Most of what we do is focused on that prototype or benchtop through that flight heritage. And then we always try to be really agile in what we're doing. So one of the things that I have learned to warn the community about is just because we did a solicitation or a competition one way last year or last time doesn't mean we'll do it the same way again. And so I think you'll see that that's actually the point of today's webinar, is to talk about what it is that we're doing that's a little bit different than how we've done it in the past, so that we can go more quickly, we can achieve greater impact, and just continue to elevate how Flight Opportunities is helping not only commercial industry, but the technology developer ecosystem that we have here. So we encourage you to read the rules carefully, ask questions if you've got them about what we're doing, and really engage so you understand what your opportunity is with this year's TechLeap Challenge. And with that, I think I will hand it over to Macarena, who's going to tell you a little bit more about the details of what we're doing.
Thanks, Danielle. So about the challenge, the prizes that you can get are up to $500,000, and we'll give a little bit more detail on that later. And that plus the opportunity for a flight test. And that's important because it means that your $500,000 does not need to pay for the flight test. That is in addition to the money that you get to develop your payload. We are aiming for up to 9 winners. And as Danielle told you, the purpose of Flight Opportunities is to advance technologies through flight testing. So what we're looking for in the applications are exactly that, are technologies that look like they would benefit from flight testing and they're well suited for flight testing in any one of our potential flight providers, which is suborbital, hosted orbital, parabolic, and so it's not limited. Let's see, what we're looking for in applications is to meet all of NASA's exploration science needs, and the range of topics will be in 2 groups. One will be the STMD technology for shortfalls, and the other will be the NASA Commercially Enabled Rapid Space Science Initiative, or CIRIS. And the next slide gives some more information on that. So for the STMD shortfalls, back in spring 2024, they went through and they identified and ranked a number of technology shortfall challenges. And you can find them in the link down there that I think will be put on the chat here shortly. And we specifically took a broad subset of these that are well suited for flight testing. And that's what's going to be on the challenge. And the specific ones you'll find out when the challenge opens. The other group of these is the CIRIS group, the Commercially Enabled Rapid Space Science. And in this case, what we're looking for is to develop research capabilities that will allow research of space studies to happen faster. So things that process samples or things like that. And as you can see, there's a link below where you can get more information on the CIRRUS initiative. And the specifics of the challenge will come out when the challenge opens. As to the timeline, I believe that's on the next slide. Yes. The dates are not written in stone, but this is what we are targeting. We are targeting to open the challenge on December 10th. And that's when you'll be able to see the specifics of the shortfalls we're asking for, as well as you'll be able to start registering. And registration will run all the way through the beginning of March. And submission deadline for the application will run through, we are targeting March 20th. Probably the best way, as was mentioned earlier, to stay up to date and get reminders and such is to sign up for alerts on the NASA TechLeap website. And I believe, so TechLeap differs from TechFlights for those who are used to TechFlights. And the next few slides, Steve will explain the differences.
Thanks, Macarena. Yeah, we've done TechFlights 12 times, so why change? We've been doing a lot of, every year. So a lot of you may have that question. Some of you may not be familiar with it, but we thought it'd be good to explain why we're changing from TechFlights to TechLeap. And there are several advantages. And so one of the primary advantages is to decrease the time to flight test. As Danielle explained earlier, rapid flight test is with a little bit higher risk posture is cheaper. It also gets the technology available faster. There's lots of reasons to do that. So our target for this challenge is to go from the challenge opening to the flight test in 12 months. And when we did TechFlights, it was almost that just to get to the award. So this gets you the award and to the flight test a lot faster potentially. So that's one of the primary drivers here. And one of the other things that is good is you also get your funding really fast. And then also there's just the way the mechanics work with this. We do site visits during the build process, so there's an opportunity for some collaboration to help out with that flight test, make sure that things are going right. And at the same time, that also helps us with our risk posture to make sure things are going well and it's a good investment. So those are kind of some of the primary reasons that that we've done the move to from TechFlights. Next slide. So for the researchers, of course, that's what you all care about. One of the things I mentioned before is you get your funding a lot faster. So TechFlights, usually the target was around 2 months to get funding. Sometimes there's hiccups and things, or not hiccups, but things to be worked through, allowable costs, things like that. And so sometimes it takes even longer than 2 months to get funding. With the prize, you get your check pretty quick, within 3 weeks, and I think even faster than that a lot of times. So it's a much more streamlined process. The funds for this challenge can be used at your discretion. So there's not an allowable cost part of this. You get the funding, you can go buy a new car if you want. A lot of our winners tend to invest in their own companies or areas, equipment, things like that, and we think that's great. But that is at your discretion. So that also eases the burden on some of the things, like I said, like allowable costs and things like that. One of the other important things that TechLeap does that TechFlights really didn't is you are able to apply as an individual. So you don't have to necessarily have a company or something like that. You can be an individual entity and apply. And the application is much easier. I counted the words between TechFlights and our application, and it's a lot shorter. It's a lot easier and more direct. You don't have to have DUNS numbers and all that registration stuff that you have to do for an NSPIRES account, which is what you have to apply to TechFlights. So with TechLeap, that's all much more simplified and with a web-based application. Next slide. So some of the details for the differences, for TechFlights, we asked for a preliminary proposal, and where you have to tell us about your technology, and that we would do a down select on that. For the TechLeap Prize, there's a registration period, and basically the registration is just to collect contact information, some demographics, and we do ask you to select one of those shortfalls that we talked about, that Macarena talked about, that talks about your area of what your technology area is. So there's a pretty easy registration. It is not, it's not near the amount of work that goes into a mandatory preliminary proposal under the TechFlight solicitation. The length of your narrative is about the same, you know, in terms of explaining your technology and your flight plans and things like that. We also, with the TechLeap, we are allowing folks up to 5 pages of visual pictures, photos, lab photos, test photos, equipment, whatever whatever you determine to help make your case for your application, which is awesome. Sometimes the pictures really do give an impression on the progress to date, the performance characteristics, whatever it is that you're trying to achieve with it. There is no summary chart required for TechLeap, and that's that 1-pager that we had for TechFlights. And the flight provider quote is not required for TechLeap. So with TechFlights, we had to have folks go out and get their flight quotes, and that's a process. That's a pretty involved process. With TechLeap, because that we're involved with providing the flights, there is no need to get a flight provider quote. And then the last thing is there's a video pitch that you'll make. It's a 90-second video pitch, which we also find helpful in meeting the team, but also, you know, seeing what they're doing and communicating how they're doing with their technology. And so it's a little bit different for TechLeap there. And with that, there's a few other things. As I mentioned, you know, we do site visits during the process as a periodic check-in. And so that allows us to have some impact. We've gotten good feedback from our folks. You know, once you win this competition, and as you'll see when the prize comes out, you know, there's a fair amount of winners in that. Once you win, you keep going on through the build rounds, and you're not competing against the other folks. We have enough funding to fund everybody to that full maximum of 500K. So the idea is that you're competing with yourself, and we want you to be successful. We want everyone to make it all the way through to flight test. And so that's actually neat. And so we get to be involved with that process, helping you and providing feedback and things like that, and especially with your flight plans, because we do have a lot of experience with that. One of the differences, though, with TechLeap is that civil servants can participate, but in a different capacity. So civil servants can be subject matter experts. They can help, you know, in that when you're selected, but they may not participate as a co-investigator. So they can't be a co-I, and they can't be a PI either for this. But that was the same with TechFlights. But you can still involve civil servants in that development and that. So as I've talked about with these build rounds, so there's 3 funding phases. There's the initial application. Fill out your application. Do you win? Yes, you win. You get a bag of money. You get your first funding. Then you go through the payload build rounds, and as you build your payload and come up with plans for the payload and testing, things like that, we'll come out and we'll evaluate that. And if you meet the objectives of that build round before the evaluation, then you can receive that additional funding. And so in the last one, we'd come out and look at it again. And then at the end of that, those 3 together could combine to equal 500K for funding. The agreement mechanism is a little different. It's a Space Act agreement with NASA. And then your funding is via prize payments versus a grant payment. And with that, I think I'm going to hand it back to Macarena, and she's going to talk about some of the FAQs.
Yeah, so I'm sure I've seen the chat, and it's very active, so there's a lot of questions coming in. We tried to look into which one would be the most popular question, so hopefully we will address them. If not, we'll address Q&A afterwards. So the first question, how detailed complete does the payload design need to be? And the answer here is it doesn't have to be fully designed. It just has to be complete enough to convey your idea so that we can understand how it meets the need of the shortfall that you're specifically addressing. Second question is, does the TechLeap Prize have an educational component? And there is no educational component. However, undergrads and graduate students are eligible to apply. Question 3, are foreign citizens eligible to apply for this TechLeap challenge? And the answer is yes, if you're residing in the US. So if you're a permanent resident, say an employee of a US company, you're allowed to apply. However, if you are a foreign national employed at a foreign company, you're not able to apply. So you'll have to look at the rules to understand exactly whether or not you're allowed to apply. And also, if there are questions, please reach out to us. That is the easiest way. If the rules are not clear, the easiest thing to do is just reach out to us with a question. Are JPL laboratory employees and contractors eligible? And they are not, as are the civil servants. Next slide, please. Is there a list of flight providers? Yes, there is. Here is the link. Hopefully it'll be put in the chat as well so that you can go to it. How do I work with flight providers to develop my application? You can talk to flight providers. You can certainly reach out. You're welcome to reach out. However, we want you to understand that you should really focus on your flight test requirements and not on a specific provider, because we will competitively bid for your flight. So you don't want to completely fix everything for provider A, and then when we competitively bid it, we end up going with provider B, and you're like, whoa, that's not how I planned it. So focus on your flight test requirements. Can applicants use their own vehicle platform for flight opportunities? For the flight opportunity, and the answer is the flight providers may apply. So if you're one of the flight providers on our list, you are allowed to apply with your own technology, and specific vehicles for flight tests will be selected by NASA. So again, it will be competitively bid. Is intellectual property protection guaranteed as part of this review process? Submissions are all treated as proprietary, as with tech flights. All reviewers are covered under NDAs and required to abide by a conflict of interest policy. And if you want, you can leave out confidential, sensitive information, obviously, as long as you convey what's good about your technology so that it doesn't hurt your possible selection of the application. Is there any flexibility in the proposal topics? So when the challenge opens, you will see the proposal topics that we're looking for. Please stick to them, because one of the first things we're going to do is going to look to see if you actually meet one of the shortfalls. And if you don't, then we're probably not even going to look further at your application. So if a proposal doesn't directly address one of the topics, does it have a chance of being selected? Well, I think I just went into that. However, sometimes they kind of have partial. But remember, you're going to be competing with other people who specifically are hitting a shortfall. So the evaluation criteria will include how well it fits the challenge or a topic that's part of our challenge. And so the ones that align with challenges the best are going to score the highest. Next question. What if my proposed solution already has government funding? So the simplest way to see this is you can't get paid twice for the same work. So government funding cannot be awarded twice for the same scope of work. However, if your previously funded project did not include the payload development and the flight testing phase, and it's an add-on to what you've already been funded for, then you are eligible. And again, if you fall in this gray zone, the best thing to do is just reach out to us with questions. I think that's it. Am I right? Yep. Nancy.
Thanks so much, Macarena and Steve, for all of the information that you shared. I'm actually going to invite Danielle to come back on and to take us through the questions that have been posted in the chat and provide us with some of those answers. Danielle, are you about ready to start answering some questions?
I am, and I'm just going to warn the audience here. So we try to be really careful about how we answer these questions. We do not want to mislead anybody. So we have our crack team of experts behind the scenes formulating answers to your questions right now. But this means two things. One, there might be periods of silence as we work together to make sure that we give you a good answer. The second is that there's some of these questions that we might not be able to answer today because we do want to make sure that we give you a really solid answer. For anything that we don't answer today, we will cover it in our FAQs when the competition is launched and in a future webinar. So don't despair, we will get you an answer, but there might be a little bit of delay if we aren't able to do that. Okay, so I'm going to turn off my camera here so you don't have to look at the side of my head. So I'm going to answer a few questions here, and then there might be a little pause. So the first one is, will SBIR awardees be eligible for TechLeap? And the answer is yes. SBIR awardees are eligible, as are businesses of all sizes. And in addition to that, even individuals may apply, as long as the entrant does not have government funding for the same work. So for example, as Macarena was just talking about, as long as you have not been funded to build a payload and flight test that payload, you may be eligible for TechLeap, even if you have received funding for other work related to this technology. And as Macarena very wisely said, if you have questions, please reach out to the email address that we have for Carrot, and we will get you that posted in the chat as well. All right, so then are there collaborative opportunities for the program? For example, we have a technology that we are developing, and we're looking to potentially integrate it into a payload that can help with data collection or testing. And so we do encourage interested participants to collaborate with partners across the space technology ecosystem. There is no restriction in terms of the number of folks that can collaborate on an application. While we don't have any structured collaboration opportunities, once you register and attend webinars, you may see other folks that are interested and make connections and team up to apply. All right. Is there a limit on the number of awards that can select hosted orbital payload testing? Put another way, is there an advantage in any way to prefer a balloon or a suborbital test platform? So there is not a particular target for any type of flight vehicle associated with this challenge. Applicants should focus on the most impactful means to flight test their technology, so including the most relevant environment, and that is part of the application. It is most important that your desired flight test plan in that application is meaningful and applicable to the technology maturation effort that addresses the challenge of this TechLeap. So could the new administration impact the upcoming schedule? We do not anticipate any change in the schedule due to a new administration. Will you be able to share the full mission schedule? Yes, the full competition schedule will be available on the competition website when the challenge is launched. Is it advantageous to pair this award with an existing NASA SBIR? Applicants may have multiple funding streams to support their technology development. However, applicants will not be eligible for TechLeap if other government funding covers the same scope of work. If your previously funded project did not include payload development and flight testing, then you may be eligible for TechLeap. Could we also develop software as opposed to hardware? TechLeap is instituted to develop technologies through flight test. In general, if the software advances NASA's mission and requires flight testing as part of the development plan, it may be considered eligible for TechLeap. Can you still include letters of support from NASA employees from the TechLeap Challenge? It is not necessary to include letters of support from NASA employees. Once the competition launches, please be sure to review both the application template and the scoring criteria so you know best how to submit a competitive proposal. So can we submit an application to test a prototype that was previously developed ahead of TechLeap? Yes, as long as this prior prototype and the payload was not developed using government funding. So you've seen this question come up in a couple of different ways. So if you fall in an area that feels great to you, we encourage you to reach out to us and ask so that we can help you determine your eligibility. All right, I'm going to pause for just a second here and make sure that I'm caught up on questions. So one moment, please. So we had another question about schedule here. For planning purposes, roughly when do you expect to make award decisions to researchers, and when do you expect to release the solicitations to flight providers? The full competition schedule will be made available once the competition launches. Our goal is to make decisions as quickly as possible after the submission deadline passes. Would the funding go through the payment management system? No, the intent is to have our competition administrator pay out the prizes directly to the winners. More information about this will be made available once the competition launches. What does judging look like, and how are the award decisions made? The evaluation panel judges will be carefully chosen for their knowledge and experience. Each judge will score and comment on the submissions assigned to them. Potential biases in the evaluation panel review are addressed through our judge training, which includes unconscious bias training for each member of the evaluation panel. Profiles of competition judges and information on the decision-making process will be available on the challenge website. How can we get on the list of flight providers? Is that opportunity still open? NASA intends to use its contracted providers for this competition. For those contracts, there is periodic onboarding opportunities for qualified industry providers. Please feel free to contact Flight Opportunities to get more information. How soon will we know what the shortfalls are? The shortfalls will be announced once the competition opens in December. The shortfalls will be posted on the competition website. Okay, we've got a couple more for you here. Can you clarify the timeline? When you talk about 12 months, what are you referring to? So Flight Opportunities is fast-paced, and our intention is for TechLeap to facilitate this speed to flight. Our program goal is to have the period of time between announcement of an opportunity and flight be 12 months or less. The specific timeline for this TechLeap challenge will be specified when the competition launches. Can applicants propose a project that involves sending a researcher to space with the experiment, otherwise known as researcher-tended payloads? For example, through a crewed flight with a suborbital flight provider? Yes, this can be proposed in an application. All right, can we apply to conduct both a parabolic test and a balloon test as part of our application? Assuming we can fit both tests under 500K. So this is a clarification about the prize versus the flight test. Winners of this challenge will receive up to $500,000 in prizes plus a flight test. So this means that you do not need to include the cost of the flight test in your budget. You'll be asked for your desired flight test plan as part of your application. As Macarena mentioned, please note that NASA intends to competitively bid the flights for the winners' technologies with industry providers, so applicants should focus on the flight test environments they need rather than a specific vehicle. There's one question: what types of materials are not allowed? While flight providers will have specific engineering and safety requirements, typically space qualified materials are not required in the assembly of your payload. Once the challenge is launched, there will be additional information about flight provider requirements available via the Flight Opportunities website. So this question is regarding intellectual property. Are there any requirements to publish or report on research findings or results? Can those distributions of those reports be restricted to protect payload IP? The ownership and use of intellectual property arising from this competition remains with you, the team. NASA may choose to negotiate for a license to use the solutions developed as a result of this competition. With respect to publication of results, Flight Opportunities does require a 48-hour and final report from each team, but those can be marked proprietary as needed. When you look at the application, you should note that there are a few sections that will be made public, and so you should answer those according to any sensitivities that you may have. To clarify, do the submissions have to apply to one of the shortfalls listed that include selections from the STMD shortfall list and Cirrus shortfalls? The submissions do need to apply to at least one specific competition-related shortfall or topic, which could be any one of the shortfalls identified in the application. So it does not need to apply to multiple shortfalls, but it must apply to at least one. There was a question about whether a single organization can submit multiple proposals. This will be a rule that is outlined in detail in the competition rules when the competition launches, so we'd encourage you to look there at that time. If the hardware has been developed via another NASA or government source of funding, so for example, SBIR, ECF, NIAC, can this opportunity be used to test the hardware that has been developed as a follow-on to the earlier funding? And can that include additional effort if necessary to flight qualify the hardware? Yes, as long as the payload objectives and the scope of work covered under this application are different from what was previously funded or provide an additional capability, you may be eligible for TechLeap. Again, reach out to us if you have questions about your eligibility. What are the respective funding amounts that are given for the milestones that total the $500,000? Additional details about these amounts and phasing, as well as information about the scoring for each phase, will be available on the competition website once it launches. As a flight provider, what is the process to support TechLeap awardees in performing their missions? NASA intends to use its IDIQ contract to support these TechLeap flights. Applicants and flight providers are welcome to interact as part of the preparation for applications to the extent that they would like to do that. Do keep in mind that each of the winning payloads, we will do a competitive bid for the flight. So applicants are encouraged to focus on the environment, the flight test environment, and the requirements for testing as opposed to a specific vehicle. Are the shortfalls the same as the July 2024 report? Are all 187 of them allowed for the challenge? While the shortfalls have not changed, so all 187 of those are still part of NASA's short civil space shortfalls. Not all 187 will be addressed as part of this TechLeap challenge. Only a subset will be included, and those will be posted when the competition launches. How many flights would we be eligible for if successful with the TechLeap challenge? Nominally, one flight would be provided for each team that successfully passes through the payload build rounds. However, if there is added rationale for a second flight or a series of flights as part of the flight test plan, this may be considered as part of the application. Are standards development organizations eligible as award recipients? For example, could ASTM International or the International Society for Pharmaceutical Engineering apply? We encourage you to look at the eligibility criteria for TechLeap, but generally speaking, these organizations would be eligible to apply. Are there standard payload interfaces, power, comms, available space between providers to ensure that after the payload build phase, the experiment can be easily adapted to any provider that wins the flight bid? Flight providers maintain their own interface requirements. NASA is responsible for the flight selection and supports the integration process, and we will work with winners and flight providers to ensure that the payload is properly integrated. We also intend to purchase the flights as part of the process of the competition, so it will not necessarily be in series. More information about that will be available once the competition launches as well. All right, just doing a final review here. Are there limits on the starting technology readiness level? There are no limits on the starting technology readiness level. However, your technology should be at a stage that it could be developed into a payload and ready for flight test within 8 months. Typically, payloads for flight test are in the TRL 4 to 6 range. Is there an advantage to technologies that apply to more than one topic of interest or cirrus topic? There is no advantage for payloads to apply to more than one shortfall. The competition scoring guidelines will provide information about how we consider applicability and impact across one or more shortfalls. We've talked mostly about shortfalls. Will you please describe the cirrus topic in a bit more detail? Information about the specific shortfalls included, as well as the cirrus topic, will be covered in the competition materials when it launches. And I'm going to go a little ad hoc here, just so that my team knows this, because this seems to be a bit of a point of confusion. So flight opportunities, our aim as an overall goal is to get from opening of an announcement to flight test within 12 months. That is a fairly lofty goal, but it's one that we think is absolutely achievable. It is possible when we launch the timeline for this challenge that the overall competition will not go in that 12-month period. And so generally speaking, we're looking somewhere around the 8-month amount of payload development time. So this entire timeline will be published at the time of the challenge launch. So again, don't over conflate our goal to get to flight within 12 months with trying to assume what the competition timeline is. The timeline that was posted earlier in this presentation is a solid notional timeline that doesn't quite line up to our 12-month goal, just because we're trying to be reasonable about running this first competition this way. But just keep in mind that speed to flight is absolutely an objective for us and an important consideration. Is there potential for the investigator award recipient to physically join the technology at flight? Yes, typically researchers are able to attend the flights. As I mentioned before, some of these questions are a bit nuanced, and so we will not be able to answer them today, but they should be fully covered when we launch the competition materials. If you don't have a satisfactory answer at that time, you can always submit a question for our frequently asked questions, and we'll be happy to tackle it at that time. I'm going to do one last scan here and see if there are any ones that I can still answer. Will there be predefined flight profiles for hosted orbital flight opportunities? For example, mission duration, orbit, etc. Or will the TechLeap participants be able to define their own profile? There will not be a predefined flight profile as part of the challenge. It is up to TechLeap participants to define profiles that best suit their payload and are within the capabilities of the flight providers. Am I correct in understanding that applications should connect to a shortfall or to a cirrus topic, but not to both? Is that accurate? So this is something that you should, again, read more carefully when the competition is launched. It is not necessary to address both a shortfall and a cirrus topic. However, you will have the opportunity to provide information if your technology does address multiple areas. But it is not a requirement that it does both or more than one. Okay, I think we have time for one last question here. Is there a subcomponent level payload that might be of interest? For example, phased array antennas designed for spacecraft. This is where you will need to look at the subset of shortfalls that are included with this challenge and make a determination as to whether your technology helps address that shortfall or not. All right, Nancy, I'm going to hand things back over to you. I think we've addressed everything that we can today, but we got through a lot of those, and thanks so much for all of the great questions that you had today. Hopefully this helps you start thinking and getting the juices flowing for TechLeap.
Thank you so much, Danielle. I really appreciate it, and the whole team who's been preparing answers for Danielle to share with you today. I do want to thank everyone for joining us today. The recording of this session will be posted on our website. I'm putting a link to that in the chat. There's also a link for signing up for alerts for when the challenge opens, which we expect to happen on December 10th. And I also encourage you to sign up and subscribe to our Flight Opportunities newsletter. Links for all of these are in the chat. Thank you all very much for joining us, and we look forward to the opening of the competition. Have a great afternoon.